What's up guys, it's me Drew and welcome back. After the 2016 Suicide Squad film, I think we'd be hard pressed to find a person that was crying out for another one, or if they were, it was out of sheer annoyance for just how poorly that movie was received. I remember walking out of the theater after that first one and one of my friends saying, "I think we can all agree that movie sucked. But Harley Quinn was awesome, she should stick around." Or at least something to that effect. College really did a number on my memory. It seems like that may have been some frequent audience feedback because just a few years later she returned in Birds of Prey, or The Fantabulous Emancipation of Harley Quinn, which was her own sort of standalone film. And again she returns in this sequel? Soft reboot? Soft requel? I'm no expert on the comics, but initially DC's live-action depiction of Harley Quinn really rubbed me the wrong way. I think that's because the kid in me really remembers her looking like this. And DC took a different route with it, to say the least. This bold new take on the character rose out of an insecurity on DC's part. DC desperately wanted to bring the Joker into their new cinematic universe, but after the iconic performance of Heath Ledger just 8 years earlier, they felt they needed to distinguish this new Joker as his own thing. After all, it's a pretty good rule of thumb to show audiences something they've never seen before. So they went this weird route with Joker. And then Harley Quinn was unwittingly dragged along for the ride. And to be fair, if you're a studio head that makes decisions about these things, what else do you really do with her? It was a multi-million-dollar example of art imitating life. But after Jared Leto started sending used condoms and anal beads to his fellow castmates, DC started to avoid him like the plague, and Harley Quinn was left alone, a remnant of a forgotten undertaking. But people loved her, and they wanted more. And just like that, the stars aligned for Harley Quinn to become one of the most iconic female anti-heroes of the modern era. So today I'm going to break down Harley Quinn's depiction in the new Suicide Squad and show how it subverts a common female film trope known as the damsel in distress. But also how this subversion is the culmination of a multi-film arc for her character. But before we get into it, every week I release movie-related content from breakdowns to skits and short films. And if that sounds interesting to you, you can go down below and subscribe.
Let's go home.
The damsel in distress is one of the oldest and most cliche film tropes that exists. It's to the point where I'm sure most of us have heard of it, or at least have a bare bones understanding of it. A female character is kidnapped, and the male character or characters have to go through hell to get her back, for whatever reason. The phrase was coined in the late 17th century, but the concept goes way back to ancient myths around the world. In Greek mythology, you can look no further than the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, in which Orpheus crosses the River of Styx into the underworld to save his wife from her fate. There's tons and tons more from ancient cultures around the world though. That's just my go-to analogy. If you can think of one, put it down below for me. If you're not paying attention though, you can easily miss just how prevalent this trope is even today. In fact, Harley Quinn in the original Suicide Squad is a pretty good example of this.
Professor, could you pick up the pace?
Come on, baby.
The trope is problematic not necessarily because the female character is useless per se, and actually in that film Harley Quinn proves herself to be quite combat capable. Just because she's holding her own doesn't necessarily let the filmmakers off the hook though. By giving the Joker, a side character, the crucial role of springing Harley Quinn, you've suddenly placed a male character as this woman's savior. Harley Quinn then loses character agency. She's not taking it upon herself to free herself, and therefore plays a passive role in her own story. The addition of the Joker in that movie comes off a bit baffling and shoehorned. He fails to save her until the very end and doesn't influence the plot at all. That's why it's clear, at least to me, that Harley's original purpose was to herald in the DCEU's new take on the Joker.
The Joker and I broke up. I wanted a fresh start. But it turns out I wasn't the only dame in Gotham looking for emancipation.
Fast forward a couple of years and now we have a new issue. It's clear that the audience reception of Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn is a lot more favorable than Jared Leto's Joker. There was a probable profit to be made in creating a standalone Harley Quinn story, but she was never meant to be a standalone character. Then something amazing happened. DC realized that their poor depiction of Harley Quinn in the first Suicide Squad actually added to her character. Emancipating Harley Quinn from the Joker served both studio interest and could also provide an arc for her character. And seeing as comic book movies were trending in a female empowerment direction, there was no better time for a standalone to be made. Birds of Prey is an incredibly meta movie. Over the course of the film, Harley learns how to be her own person when she's defined so much of her personality by the ultimate abusive boyfriend, the Joker.
Being Joker's girl gave me immunity. I could do whatever I wanted to whoever I wanted, and no one ever dared to object.
The film seems hell-bent on proving that she's interesting enough to stand on her own 2 feet. Even in flashbacks with the Joker, the film doesn't even give him the dignity of showing his face.
This is where it all began, Puddin'. You motherfucker.
Look at my face!
I mean, sure, you could chalk that up to them not wanting to pay Jared Leto, but even that behind-the-scenes decision ultimately served the story. Throughout Birds of Prey, the whole of Gotham underestimates Harley Quinn. To them, she's always been labeled the Joker's girl. And now that they're broken up, the criminal underworld is much less willing to pardon her debauchery. By the end, she decides to forego any masculine protection or stability. Quinn is unwilling to define herself by a man again.
Don't you see? You're trying to kill me. I'm the only one who can protect you. You know you can't stand on your own, Quinn. You're not the type. Me. You need me.
This line at the end of the film is the perfect fuck you to DC, I guess that they're giving themselves, and anyone that thought that this character needed to be defined by the Joker.
We're here to save you.
You were gonna save me?
It was a really good plan, too.
Well, I can go back inside and you can still do it.
That's patronizing.
I'm so sorry. Harley Quinn.
Bloodsport.
If at first you don't succeed, try again. I think, yes, we'd all agree that the new Suicide Squad addressed most of the issues that general audiences had with the original. Warner Brothers uncharacteristically gave James Gunn almost complete creative control of the filming, right down to the IP. They told him he could direct any DC property that he wanted to do. After Guardians of the Galaxy, I guess Gunn realized that ensemble movies are more his speed, so he decided on Suicide Squad. Warner Brothers only had one stipulation: that Harley Quinn be included in this new installment. They did a great job with Harley in this movie. Early on, we see her hitting on some of her teammates, giving us the impression that she's finally moved on from her abusive relationship with the Joker.
I love your accent.
American women all love accents.
We do. Because we don't got none.
Then, well, she gets captured by the enemy forces and taken hostage to the villain. At first glance, this is not a great look. It seems like she might once again fall into a damsel in distress portrayal. We link up with her again later when she meets her sexy new love interest. There's a number of things going on in this scene that amount to a different and far superior depiction of Harley Quinn. First, we see her male character try to define her as something that is wholly uncharacteristic to who she actually is.
Harley Quinn's fire and rebellion in the face of American oppression is something to which my entire country aspires.
Oh.
Fire and rebellion in the face of American oppression aren't exactly the words I would use to describe Harley Quinn. He also dresses her up like a doll and immediately sexualizes her, perhaps commenting on how the male gaze has conditioned audiences to do the exact same thing. As the scene plays out, we realize that Harley is letting herself be damseled and distressed.
When we talk about the past, we change our words.
Ordinarily in the trope, the damsel finds herself in a compromising situation because she has been taken against her will. We find here that Harley Quinn has become seduced by the antagonist and actually starts to go along with his intentions.
My people say you would make the perfect wife. Because, you symbolize anti-American fervor. Upon spending the day with you, I find myself hardly able to think straight. You are perfect.
You were so freaking hot.
Then, at the climax of the scene, while she's on the cusp of character regression, the prince reveals himself to be somewhat despicable.
If anyone dares to say a negative word about their new presidente, their parents, their children, and anyone they ever loved will be sent to Jotunheim to feed the beast.
In the ultimate act of rebellion and self-determination, she makes the fatal choice to shoot the prince because he's showing some evil red flags. James Gunn pays respect to Harley Quinn by recognizing her place in a multi-film arc. Where the original Suicide Squad shows her in the grips of an abusive relationship and Birds of Prey shows her evolving past it, the new Suicide Squad shows her walking the walk and talking the talk. It's the social and personal proof that she's moved on, and confirmation that she's willing and able to define herself. But if that's not enough for you, later on, once again, Harley finds herself in another compromising situation. The antagonists are torturing her for information, and the predominantly male Suicide Squad decides that they have to save her. It's a classic damsel in distress situation.
There's something we gotta take care of first.
What?
You're gonna risk the entire mission for a mental defective dressed as a court jester.
This coming from a guy that wears a toilet seat on his head? We don't leave one of our own behind.
The entire concept is then flipped on its head as they plan an elaborate escape for her, and she frees herself before they even begin. In a visually spectacular and action-packed scene, Harley leaves a trail of destruction as she exits her torture chamber. The whole trope is played as a joke, and it's fucking perfect. Harley Quinn entered the DCEU as a damsel in distress, waiting and desperately hoping for her abusive boyfriend to free her. She's now reached a point where she's making her own decisions that are wholly independent from the expectations and wishes of the men that surround her, all the while becoming a vehicle for the writers to subvert common storytelling tropes that are derogatory to her gender. I kind of blew my mind thinking about all this. I don't think anyone, myself included, would recognize these three films as like a Harley Quinn trilogy without sitting down and giving it a great deal of thought. But really, there's enough there for the argument to be made, so I'm kind of curious as to why I've never seen this take before. If you've made it this far into my mansplaining of a beloved comic book villain, you should know that I have a plethora of videos about depictions of women in film, and you can find the one at random here. But what did you think of the Suicide Squad? Was there anything that blew your mind or worth talking about? Let me know in the comments section. I'm always on the lookout for movies that I can break down or maybe do a skit about, so if you have one you'd like to recommend, let me know down there as well. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully I'll see you next week.